Io sono felicissima di essere qui oggi, di poter chiacchierare con un autore che ha rivoluzionato in un certo senso il genere mystery, ibridandolo con il crime, ibridandolo con anche degli accenni storici, ibridandolo con tantissimi altri generi, facendo veramente un lavoro che è quello di aver riportato a una lettura democratica, anche popolare. Lui è autore di bestseller, evidentemente con 2 libri che hanno venduto moltissimo in tutto il mondo, e quindi io sono davvero felice di poter fare una chiacchierata con Stuart Turton. Benvenuto al Salone del Libro. Grazie a te. Intanto molto felice di poterti vedere fisicamente, perché ormai dopo tutte queste presentazioni in Zoom, online, è quasi strano vedersi dal vivo, no? Come la stai vivendo questo ritorno alla nuova normalità?
It's amazing, isn't it? It's actually so cool to be in a room with people, even if we're all in masks and we look like we're about to rob a bank together, which we could do that after this. That would be amazing if anyone's got free time. I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it, because writing books is boring. It's very boring. So you sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day, and then the best part is that then you get to travel and meet people and talk about the books and do things. So I wrote Devil and Dark Water. Hang on, let's try this. My wife is half Italian, she's going to kill me if I get this wrong. Diavolo dell'acqua scura.
Più o meno, bravo, bene.
Thank you very much. And I wrote that, and I sat in front of my computer for 8 hours a day, and then it came out, and I promoted it by sitting in front of my computer for 8 hours a day. And it was intensely boring, so thank you all for coming.
Effettivamente è stato un periodo molto alienante, e tra l'altro, se non mi ricordo male, proprio verso la fine delle Sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle, il tuo esordio letterario, si parla proprio di un lusso della normalità. In quel caso era evidentemente rapportato a tutt'altro, però proprio questo concetto del lusso della normalità è qualcosa che stiamo riscoprendo in questo periodo storico in particolare.
Yeah, but with this strange, sinister undercurrent. So it's like, go out into the world and do things normally again, but there is still this thing that might kill you. But don't worry about that. It's fine. It's very good for being a mystery author, because in mystery books there's always something in the background that could possibly kill you. So yeah, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a strange couple of years as we all get used to trying to get back to normal and the currents of normality without, being terrified all the time.
E tra l'altro per me era interessante per me poter chiacchierare con te, anche perché tu sei anche, come dire, un autore che sta vivendo in questo momento storico della propria vita la sua vita da autore, da scrittore di bestseller, ma tu sei una persona che ha avuto tantissime vite diverse, quindi è interessante poterti chiedere, anche dopo aver pubblicato 2 romanzi di così grande successo ed essere quindi diventato nella tua nuova veste di autore di bestseller, e di raccontarci come ti trovi, se ti fitta bene questo nuovo vestito, perché tu hai fatto anche tanti lavori diversi, hai avuto tante vite diverse.
Yeah, it's funny, you don't think about it too much, so your job is to write a book, and then if that sells well, truly that's nothing to do with me. That's about the marketing people at the publishing house. Neri Pozza have done an amazing job here. That's their role, so that's their success. I just write the story to the best of my ability, and then it goes away from me and I don't see it. So by the time people read it, for me, that book has been gone from my life for 7 months. So when people come and ask me questions about characters, and I'm like, I don't know, that was a year ago. So I'm already, like, right now we're talking about Devil and Dark Water, but I've been writing my 3rd novel for the last 7 months, so I'm writing that one. So I will tell you this, being an author suits me better, because I was terrible at every other job I've ever had. Really, really awful. So I'm mildly okay at this one. So that's good criteria.
Infatti tu sei stato insegnante di inglese, sei stato giornalista e ti occupavi di tecnologia in particolare, insomma tante vesti diverse, quindi fortunatamente da quello che ci stai raccontando adesso sei autore di romanzi e quindi va bene così, però immagino che...
You missed my best job though.
Quale?
My best job, I worked on a goat farm in Australia. That was the best job. And my job was to, this is truly a job in Australia, I had to ride around on a quad bike with a shotgun and fire the shotgun into the air to scare away camels from the goat farm. That was my job.
Ma perché allora scrivi libri? Scusami, era molto più divertente quel lavoro lì.
Yeah, but it's in the Australian outback. There's nothing for 19 hours in any direction. It was a very lonely life. Just the camels, that's all you can talk to. Camels and goats.
Forse allora riesco a capire anche perché all'interno dei tuoi libri ci siano delle sensazioni che andremo a vedere, delle percezioni che io ho avuto di straniamento, di alienazione in alcuni casi. Forse sarà dovuto a questo periodo australiano, lo vedremo magari più tardi. Infatti in realtà io ti volevo chiedere questo, proprio prima di addentrarci all'interno dei due romanzi, delle sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle e del diavolo e l'acqua scura, ed entrambi editi tra l'altro da Neri Pozza, che ancora non ho citato, ma che pessima presentatrice, però eccoci qui. Dicevo, lo so, infatti meno male che ci sei tu che lo fai al posto mio, lo so, è terribile. Grazie, ma almeno me l'hai fatto tu. No, quello che ti dicevo è, evidentemente la tua vita ha portato poi a avere l'esigenza di voler raccontare attraverso anche delle storie molto complesse, misteriose, con dei crimini, con tanti livelli di lettura diversi. Che cosa, tu sei della zona di Liverpool, se non mi ricordo male, ok. Che cosa fa un ragazzo di Liverpool? Che cosa legge? Che cosa guarda? Che cosa fa per poi arrivare ad avere una mente così complessa per scrivere due libri come questi?
It's not so much what I watch TV and culturally, it was the books that I fell in love with. So I fell in love with Agatha Christie books. That's where it started when I was 8 years old. And I absolutely adored those novels. And before I wanted to be a novelist and write mystery novels, I just wanted to write a book the way that she wrote them. That's all I wanted to do. I had no concept that being a novelist was a job. I'm still surprised that it's a job now that I do it. You shouldn't be allowed to do this for a living. It's ridiculous. So I just wanted to do that, and I wanted to tell stories the way she told them, which is with complexity, but with crimes that you as the reader could solve. They felt fair to me, they felt like board games, and that's what I wanted to capture. So I wanted to do that initially. And then when I actually started writing, again, I've mentioned this earlier, I find writing, very seriously, I find it very, very hard to do because I find it quite boring. Not writing books, but the act of writing, the act of sitting in one place at a computer, at a keyboard, just, putting words down for 8 hours a day. You don't get to do anything else. That's very tedious. So what I have to do to keep myself entertained is make sure that every single day I'm writing something that entertains me first. I am my first reader. And the way that I do that is to make it as complex as possible. So there's loads of twist types, there's loads of different characters, so that if I don't feel like writing this character this day, I can write this other character this other day, and they have an equally fascinating backstory. And what I want to make sure I'm doing always is making sure that each of the characters in my book could be the protagonist of the story. That each of them, you could refocus it on anyone in The Devil in the Dark Water, on anyone in The Seven Deaths, and it would feel like their book, because they have a backstory, they have a plot, they have secrets, they have things they're trying to hide. And out of that becomes this huge tapestry, this huge complexity, and that's where it comes from. It's just me trying to entertain myself first, and hopefully it entertains everyone else, second, third, fourth.
Quindi la complessità dei tuoi libri sostanzialmente è volta a sconfiggere la tua noia, principalmente, da quello che sto capendo. Più o meno.
That's my entire life is about defeating my boredom every single day. I'm bored at breakfast, so I've got to change my cereals. Bored at lunchtime. It's terrible. It must be awful for my wife.
Che è qui tra l'altro, che salutiamo. Hai fatto un riferimento che evidentemente è anche il primo riferimento che una persona che legge i tuoi libri può avere, che è quello di Agatha Christie, no? Del suo tipo di scrittura. Però per la verità io credo che ci sia molta complessità nel senso più positivo del termine, molto più che chiamarlo l'ennesimo giallo, nel senso, per molti anni la narrativa di giallo, thriller è sempre stata relegata a una dimensione molto mainstream, molto facile, no? Sono le letture da fare sotto l'ombrellone in vacanza, quando si è al mare, letture poco impegnate. In questo caso invece sarà perché io evidentemente ho delle facoltà mentali un pochino ridotte, ma per leggere questi libri io magari lo schemino con i personaggi, mi dovevo annotare delle cose a parte per ricostruire e raccapezzarmi. Addirittura sul diavolo e l'acqua scura c'è proprio nell'introduzione la mappa delle parti della nave, no? Proprio per capire anche noi in base a un linguaggio che non conosciamo, però evidentemente c'è una complessità molto grande di fondo, per cui oltre ad Agatha Christie io ti chiedo anche questo, se tu ti ritrovi anche come riferimenti più alti, no? Perché è svilente per Agatha Christie evidentemente, ma tutta quella narrativa un po' noir da Edgar Allan Poe, ma anche Conan Doyle, ma anche, so che tu l'hai citato molto spesso, Franz Kafka per esempio, e torniamo a quello che ci raccontavi, no? Io ci vedo molto il processo di Kafka, ma anche di Verwandlung, della metamorfosi di Kafka, questo concetto non solo di straniamento, di personaggi che a volte fanno cose inspiegabili, ma anche la gratuità a volte di alcuni gesti dannosi, dolosi che i protagonisti fanno all'interno della trama. Ecco, volevo chiederti quali sono i tuoi riferimenti anche in questo caso, che prendono un po' dal noir, che prendono un po' anche dal gotico, se vogliamo, inglese.
You've already covered them all. That was all of it. We're done.
Scusa.
Don't be silly. This is brilliant. Next question. No, it's not a conscious thing. So you write a novel, and it's a problem-solving exercise. So is anybody in the room, any novelists in the room, any writers, short stories, fiction, anything? Just put your hands up, big and high. Let's have a look. Hello, fellow sufferers. So every single minute that you're writing a book, you're problem solving. It's like, how do I get this emotion across to the reader? How do I introduce this plot point? How do I introduce this character in the strongest possible way? Everything you're doing has to be considered. So to solve those problems, it's useful to have a range of answers, pre-existing answers, and the best source of those is other novelists, because other novelists have already solved every problem that you will ever come across. This is why I think it's important, if you are a novelist, to have read really widely and to read in a lot of different genres. Like, I don't read a lot of crime, strangely. I read a lot of literary fiction. I used to read a lot of Gothic. I've read a lot of noir, Agatha Christie, but I don't read a lot of modern crime, because the answers to my problems aren't in modern crime. They're not doing the same thing that I'm trying to do with my books. Gothic is solving my problems. As you said, noir solving my problems. Kafka solves my problems. So those are the books. And if you're writing a time-travelling, body-hopping murder mystery novel, you're going to have a lot of problems, not least of which is that you're going to go insane halfway through writing it. So when I was constantly writing, how do I tell the audience that this character has now switched a body? How do I do that? Well, Kafka's already done that. So you look at how he did it, and you look at the mood and the atmosphere and the tone that he created, and you try and borrow it. For Devil and Dark Water, I wanted the boat that it's set on to feel like a place. I wanted it to feel like a real place, but I wanted it to feel like a character. I wanted it to feel like it had motive all of its own, that it was quite a sinister place, that it was up to something in the background. Who does that well? Well, Gothic literature does that very, very well. So I went to the Bronte, I went to Wuthering Heights, I went to Jane Eyre, I went to all these novels that have big, creepy houses, and I read those and I picked up, and you assimilate this stuff. So in some cases it's a very purposeful thing that you're doing, but other times these are novels you've read in the past, you've accumulated that knowledge, and when you start writing, you are using that to solve your problem. Which is a very long-winded way of answering your question, I'm sorry.
Vabbè, va benissimo, perché in realtà è tutto quello che è il processo che ti porta anche, no, a raggiungere una complessità tale, e quello che mi viene da dire anche è che secondo me tu vorresti scrivere in maniera tra virgolette semplice, come può essere un romanzo di Agatha Christie, quando semplice in realtà non lo è per niente, ma poi a un certo punto arriva il sovrannaturale che spariglia le carte, no? Perché c'è anche questa componente qui del dare, in base a quelle che sono anche le tue suggestioni, a quello che hai assimilato nel corso degli anni, dare delle spiegazioni probabili a eventi totalmente improbabili.
Well, it was a thing from the beginning that I thought, if I was going to write a mystery novel, and I was going to introduce things like devils, superstition, monsters, and in the first book, time travelling, body hopping, these are still mysteries. And a mystery genre book explains its mysteries. That's what it does. That's the promise to the reader. I will give you the answers to the questions I've set up. So that's my promise always in every single book. So if you've got an incredibly outlandish situation, unlikely situation, I feel it's my duty and my obligation to explain that the best I can. I'll never just leave it hanging, because you can't do Franz Kafka as a mystery. Franz Kafka never bothered explaining anything, and it works because that's part of the tone, it's what he's doing. And also, he kept dying before he finished his novels, which is not something I plan to do. But it's something George R.R. Martin might do, but you know. So I always want to explain things, and I want to give them the most grounded possible explanations, which I heard a few titters in the crowd, people who read my books. But there is a balance there to be struck. You want to set up these really intriguing premises that feel like they're so far out there that they can never be brought back into like the human sphere of existence, and that's exactly what you want to do. And then you've got to put a mystery over the top of it. And that's the most gratifying thing, is when you work out in the plotting how you can do that and how you're going to pull that off. And what I always try to do is make sure that I'm writing an ending that 50% of my audience will hate, absolutely just despise. Because that means that 50% of the audience will probably love it, which is a very strange way of thinking about it, but it is kind of the way it works out. So I was talking to a lady earlier at the signing who was telling me that she was going to introduce 7 Deaths to her book club. And I was like, 50% of that book club will hate that book, because that's what always happens, but hopefully 50% will love it. You don't want the book that ends and everyone's just like, meh, okay, and then you forget about it tomorrow. You want the book that lingers in people's mind, even if it's just because they're so angry.
E questo tra l'altro secondo me lo si percepisce anche nella scelta del carattere dei personaggi principali. Cioè, mi spiego meglio. Per esempio nel Diavolo e l'acqua scura, il personaggio del detective Samuel Pepys è un personaggio che da una parte si potrebbe risolvere dicendo è un po' lo Sherlock Holmes della situazione, no? Però per la verità non è così, perché Sherlock Holmes ha quella sorta di freddezza, no? E di astio verso il genere umano, che lo porta sempre a essere molto razionale, molto freddo, mentre invece in questo caso la figura del detective è un detective appassionato, un detective empatico in alcuni casi addirittura. Quindi questo, quello che ci stai dicendo, è anche molto nel carattere dei personaggi stessi, che siano personaggi positivi o negativi o con tutta la complessità del caso.
The Sherlock Holmes is a particularly interesting reference. So anyone who's not read Devil and Darkwater, my second novel, in the sort of way that the 7 Deaths, my first novel, was a kind of homage to Christie. My second novel was a homage to Conan Doyle and to Sherlock Holmes stories. And the interesting part about that, I think, from my perspective, is that I hate Sherlock Holmes. Hate him so much. And the reason I hate him is because he has absolutely no arc through his own novels whatsoever. So has everybody seen the recent adaptations of the Sherlock Holmes stories? Yeah? So what they do there is they give him emotion. So as it goes through, he becomes kinder and nicer and friendlier. And I don't know if you've read the books, but that never happens in the books. In the books, he starts off as an absolute dick, and he finishes as an absolute dick. Nothing changes. And then you've got Watson, right? So Watson, so this is my passion. This is what we're talking about now for the rest of this session. Ho
toccato il nervo scoperto.
You really have, yeah. But Watson, you know, they go through this career, and so it'll be like, Watson will introduce a story about Sherlock Holmes with a line that says, in that year, I had married my 3rd wife, had my 4th child, had started a medical practice on Harley Street, and I'd moved house. Sherlock Holmes was still in 221B Baker Street, smoking crack. And it always struck me that we were reading about the wrong character. This is Sherlock Holmes solves mysteries in identikit ways every single time. Sometimes the solutions are great, sometimes a snake did it. It was very odd. So when I was reading those as a boy, I found them very unsatisfying. And I thought, when I started writing this novel, it felt like a chance to sort of have my go at Sherlock Holmes and kind of sort of pick apart what I didn't like and fill it with things that I did like. And what I did like was a passionate character who had those skills. What, we're still talking about this and I'm still complaining. Has anybody ever noticed in Sherlock Holmes that all of his powers, and they are superpowers of deduction, he uses in the first 2 pages of the novel? All of it. So there's a guy walking down the street outside his flat and he tells you everything about the guy he's not met who's walking down the street outside his flat. And then when it comes to the mystery, what does he do? He just spots something written on the wall that everyone else has missed. That's the level of his skill. It's bizarre. So it's a really fluctuating superpower. So I decided with this that I wanted my Sherlock Holmes style character to have his powers all the way through. So he can always do that deduction. He always sees exactly what's there in front of him that everyone else has missed. But that makes it really hard to plot a novel because it should only be 3 pages long, which explains why he's in jail.
Esatto. Tra l'altro questo parallelismo, infatti questa critica, se vuoi, che avevo percepito e che magari si percepiva nel Diavolo e l'acqua scura nei confronti del ruolo di Sherlock Holmes, lo si vede anche dalla sua guardia del corpo, diciamo, che effettivamente è una persona che è molto verticale nel suo, anche durante la narrazione, prende vita proprio come personaggio, anche diventa principale in un certo qual modo. E ti volevo chiedere quest'altra cosa. So che è sciocco chiederlo, diciamo, in romanzi che sono ambientati secoli fa, quindi evidentemente non può esserci una vera e propria critica sociale, ecco. Però quanto c'è di tuo e di quella che è la tua percezione, il tuo sentimento, anche in quanto persona che vive in Inghilterra, sulle disuguaglianze sociali? Perché io vedo che c'è un leitmotiv che vedo tra le 7 morti di Evelyn Hardcastle e anche il Diavolo e l'acqua scura, è un focus neanche così tanto sottile sulle disuguaglianze sociali, quindi proprio sulla frizione sociale. Quanto di tuo c'è di critica sociale all'interno di questi libri?
Oh yeah, completely. It's built into me. I was born and raised in a working class town in the north of England, outside of Liverpool. The industry, for me, growing up, going through school, I was supposed to leave school early and go and work in a warehouse or a factory. That was the expectation of what I should do. The idea that people from my hometown then go and write novels is ridiculous. It was not encouraged. The teachers didn't inspire me to do this. There was a lot of obstacles in my way to doing this, and it's only when you come out of that environment and you start meeting middle-class families where it's like your kid can be anything they want to be. My parents were, my parents supported me and they were great. But around middle-class children in the UK is the perception that life is anything they want it to be, and they will be supported and they will be looked after. For working-class children, it's not. The perception is you leave school and you go and get a job and you make some money, and that's it. And that's bothered me ever since. So whether I mean to write about it or not, it comes out in every novel. It seeps up, it bubbles up. And the 2 novels that I've written about just happen to be about, don't read into this, wealthy people dying badly. And the working class people are always very nice.
Cose per cui anche la tua psicanalista si frega le mani, perché no, è qualcosa che evidentemente hai dentro di te anche.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it is strange, like it is a thread, because it's something that's always on my mind. It's something that I always see around me, and it's something that's very normalised in the UK. Even now, it's very normalised that there are working class children and there are middle class children, and the expectations of both of these. And when you say it out loud, it's ridiculous, and everyone will be like, no. But it is the truth. And there's hopefully, as I go forward in my life, a lot more I'll be able to do about it, and a lot more I can say about it. But right now, in my sphere, this is what I can do. I can put them in quite light, frivolous, fun novels. We can talk about these things, and hopefully while people are reading them and having a good time, they also begin to see it as ridiculous as I see it, and be as annoyed by it as I'm annoyed by it.
E tra l'altro evidentemente sono libri, in particolar modo il tuo primo, il tuo esordio, Le 7 morti di Evelyn Hardcastle, sono state scritte in un lasso di tempo dove ancora forse non c'era la discussione sulla Brexit e tutto quello che comportava, però evidentemente tu hai anche una posizione hai te privilegiata per poter anche fare un raffronto con quello che è la situazione della Brexit in questo momento. Noi dall'Italia vediamo di come ci sia una corsa alle pompe di benzina in questi giorni per aver paura di restare senza, vediamo delle cose quasi catastrofiche e quindi mi viene proprio da chiederti come vedi effettivamente anche nella stretta attualità della questione Brexit.
Sorry, my earphones have cut out, so I completely missed the question. It started going really fuzzy. Is there anyone who knows how to fix technology anywhere in the room?
Can you hear properly now or no?
Yeah, I can hear you through the microphone. I just can't hear the translation coming through on there.
Sistemiamo
sorry, if anybody thought that I'm just wearing these and listening to music instead of really paying attention, I'm so sorry.
You were listening to the soccer match.
If you just want to ask the question in English, I can answer it while this gets fixed.
Perfect. No, I was just asking you about the, of course, the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle have been written in a long time, and it was a time when the Brexit discussion wasn't on at the time. But I mean, for me right now, it's something that I have to ask you because right now we are listening to the news, and what is happening right now in the UK is that people are going to get gasoline because they are terrified they will be, without anything in the next days. So, what is the perception right now that you have concerning this social problem that you have?
God. Brexit, there's two things. I was a staunch Remainer. I campaigned for Remain, I knocked on doors, I wanted to talk about it. The vote happened and people made a decision. I think the crucial part now still has to be, and this is not going to be a short-term thing, is to understand why my people voted for Brexit. Why did that happen? What happened? What was so bad and so desperate? Brexit, this is going to sound straight to an Italian crowd, Brexit now doesn't really matter to me so much. What matters is that the government that drove it through, that the government that is still in charge in a country, and is going to be in charge for a long time, is wildly popular, still. So our COVID deaths are through the roof, our infections are through the roof, you can't get fuel, there's no lorry drivers to deliver food to supermarkets will run out of food, and they're going to get elected in a landslide again at the next election. Our competing parties can't get close to them. It's not a Brexit problem. Brexit was a symptom of something deeper that is happening to us. It's happening to our population, and it's happened in the US, and I dare say it's going to happen across Europe, and it's a polarisation of the political spectrum. It's people falling behind a party rather than falling behind an ethos. So if the party used to be that if your party did something that was good for you, you voted for them, and if they didn't, you voted for the other party, and that doesn't happen anymore. People are welding themselves to parties. Even if the party doesn't do what they want them to do and actively harms them, that needs to be understood, because that doesn't stop with the UK. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be here, it's going to be France, it's going to be Germany, it's happened in Brazil, it's going to happen absolutely everywhere, and it will tear us apart, it will tear the world apart, it's going to cause wars, it's going to be a genuine problem if climate change doesn't get us first. So, that was alarming, wasn't it? So, Brexit's a funny thing. We could have voted against Brexit, and I wish we had, and we wouldn't have the problems that we've got now, but it would not have dealt with the underlying cause of Brexit. There would have been something else that would have come along that would have done this to us. So as easy as it would be for me as a Remainer who campaigned against this to say, well, we told you this was coming, we told you these issues would happen, it's not going to get me anywhere. All it's going to do is drive the people who voted for it further away from the middle ground where we can talk about these things. The issue now has to be, how do we bring people back to a place where we can talk about this and say, what is it, what are your issues, what are the problems, why is this happening? Why don't you trust these politicians who are theoretically standing up and saying, we're going to support you and help you? Why don't you trust them? Why do you trust the buffoon with the blonde hair and the 7 children? Like, what's going on there? Because there's something huge and important happening there, and it's not been dealt with.
E sono tra l'altro, credo, tutte domande
Yes, I
che
can.
Dicevo che secondo me sono quasi tutte le domande che hai appena fatto, domande che poteva benissimo farsi una persona che doveva imbarcarsi in un galeone nel 1634, per cui in realtà tante volte sono dei pattern storici che sono, come dicevi tu, preoccupanti. Vorrei però concentrarmi su un altro aspetto dei romanzi di Stuart Turton, che è l'aspetto ludico, perché sono effettivamente 2 romanzi che si sono prestati molto bene per un particolare tipo di adattamento. Di solito gli adattamenti dei romanzi sono non semplicemente, però normalmente si declinano su serie TV oppure su film. In questo caso però le sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle in Italia, tra l'altro Neri Pozza ha avuto questa grande intuizione di trasformare il libro in una escape room. Non so se qualcuno di voi è riuscito, ecco, ci sono delle fan dell'escape room in sala, a Milano con The Impossible Society, questa società che da tanti anni si occupa di escape room, hanno realizzato proprio l'escape room declinata sul romanzo. E tra l'altro io ti ringrazio per questo, perché tu non lo sai, ma io ho provato l'escape room e mi sono sentita così intelligente che come mai mi era successo nella mia vita, quindi io ti ringrazio di cuore perché sono riuscita, chiedo a Neri Pozza, una quarantina di minuti e ce l'ho fatta, quindi mi sento molto smart per questo, grazie. Ma al di là di...
If I'd done the escape room, I would still be in there now.
pur avendo scritto tu il libro, ok? Che è curioso.
Yeah, I would know. I'm terrible at those things. I would just be banging on the walls, begging for food.
Ma infatti la mia domanda voleva essere questa, nel senso che oltre appunto all'escape room delle sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle, Il diavolo e l'acqua scura, Giochi Uniti ha realizzato proprio un gioco in scatola, un gioco di carte, ed è un gioco anche appunto molto intricato, molto interessante. Quindi innanzitutto ti chiedo se tu sei una persona a cui piace giocare, non ludopatia, nel senso proprio ti piace giocare con videogiochi, escape room, giochi in scatola, questo tipo, sei un giocatore?
No, I'm not. I play video games.
Ok.
So I do that, but no, I've never been in an escape room. I've never really played board games either. I think what's interesting about that is Neri Pozza. Have we mentioned Neri Pozza enough now? Neri Pozza.
Dobbiamo farne 10 entro la fine dell'ora, quindi ce li segniamo.
Yeah, just check the contract. There it is. What they very cleverly identified was that these are games, like they were written to be games. As I said, I loved Agatha Christie because I always felt that was a fair thing that she did, that she put all the clues in front of you. There was often a map in those books, so it felt like you had the board laid out in front of you. And she would let you solve them, she would let you get there ahead of them. Very often you couldn't, but she trusted the work enough to let that happen. And I felt the same with the novels, that when I'm writing these novels, I want the mystery to be solvable by the reader. I want you to feel that cleverness that you talked about in the escape room, that you can get there ahead of me and be like, oh, I solved it, that's great. And you have that thrill, because there's a thrill in that as much as there's a thrill in the reveal of who did it by the detective. So that's the sort of tightrope I'm constantly trying to walk. And Neri Pozza, 7 at times.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, they identified that, and the two ways they thought to promote this book were both these games, because it perfectly suits what I was trying to do.
Infatti, al di là, adesso mi hai rovinato la domanda dicendomi che non sei uno che gioca a parte i videogiochi, però te lo chiedo lo stesso perché in realtà, a parte gli scherzi, come scrittore secondo me è interessante, perché immagino tu ti sia piacevolmente sorpreso anche, no? Del fatto che i tuoi romanzi siano diventati in una declinazione appunto ludica. Secondo te quali sono gli elementi di un libro come i tuoi, in questo caso, che portano ad avere una declinazione di gioco efficace? È il sovrannaturale? È il mistero e basta? Qual è la complessità dei personaggi, le ambientazioni? Quali sono gli elementi secondo te che fanno sì che un libro diventi un buon gioco?
I think that there has to be a list of characters, because characters are players. So I'm interested in the mechanics of novels, I'm interested in the mechanics of creativity, because if you look across sort of movies, TV, board games, video games, there's fundamental principles to creativity and to entertainment that apply always. The arcs of characters, where they begin, where they end, what happens in the middle. I think for a board game, there has to be a sense of knowledge progression. Mm-hmm. That as you go through the game, you accumulate knowledge, and the knowledge helps you to win out at the end. So you develop strategies to beat the opposing player. That's why games, I think, like Snakes and Ladders, perhaps aren't that, I don't know what that would be in Italian, but it's just not a very entertaining game. You roll the dice, and either you're lucky or you're not lucky. There's no skill in that. These books are about the knowledge of progression. They're about a character picking up the clues, cleverly applying them to a situation and working out the puzzle. Good board games, good video games ask you to do the same thing, they ask you to sort of hold on to the knowledge, go through, apply it, use it in specific ways, whether that's being Mario and jumping over platforms and learning that if you do this sort of action, it leads to this sort of consequence. So there's a lot of mirrors there that I think make it, you know, really, really entertaining games. I mean, they're being adapted. We talked about television and movies. They're both being adapted for television. And it's going to be interesting to see whether that carries over onto the screen, because TV shows have to show a lot more things than books do. And if they adapt them in such a way that they show the reader too much, they're going to take away the potential thrill of solving it before they get there. And then also, if they show too much, they make the mystery too obvious, and then you let the tension out of the final conclusion. So I'm fascinated to see how they do that.
E tra l'altro, correggimi se sbaglio, secondo me io vorrei aggiungere un elemento che secondo me è interessante e che può rendere diciamo facile un romanzo che si trasformi in un gioco, che è l'approccio che noi abbiamo quando un romanzo è ben scritto, naturalmente come nel tuo caso, un approccio compulsivo alla lettura, cioè se un romanzo è quello che ti porta a stare sveglio la notte perché lo vuoi finire tutto d'un fiato, è un po' come quando fai una giocata, no? I giochi in scatola, i giochi di ruolo, non vuoi fare un'ora, poi aspetti una settimana e poi vai avanti, vuoi fare tutto in un round unico. Quindi anche questo approccio che il lettore si senta sempre teso verso vedere come va a finire, come risolvere un mistero, un crimine che sia, secondo me è quello che forse gli dà la forza per essere anche un gioco, non trovi?
That's interesting, because again we talked about sort of mirroring mechanics across different art forms. So what you just described as the compulsive nature of a mystery, for me, is just writing cliffhangers. So at the end of every chapter you want a cliffhanger, because the cliffhanger is what makes you read the next page and the next page and the next page until it's 3 o'clock in the morning and have completely ruined your day at work the next day. And that's something that's built into my novels, because that's something I enjoy in novels. I enjoy when you just have to have one more chapter and then another chapter and it just keeps going. But yeah, I suppose that would make it like fitting for a game. But again, because I've never actually sat down and played board games, I don't have enough friends. That's my problem. You need friends to play board games. So I've read a lot of books, but like no friends.
Infatti, se c'è un difetto del gioco, del board game del diavolo e l'acqua scura, è che almeno 3 giocatori e io non ho 2 amici, quindi di solito faccio un po' fatica a giocarci.
Look,
esatto, per fortuna ci sono tante persone che adesso conoscono e con cui quindi potremo giocare insieme. Io a questo punto direi che ringrazio di cuore Stuart Turton, perché è stata una chiacchierata dove abbiamo affrontato tantissimi temi, potremmo stare qui ore veramente a parlare di questo. Ho un altro paio di domande in canna, se doveste essere timidi, ma spero di no, però quindi se volete io chiederei a voi se avete qualche curiosità, qualche domanda, avete insomma l'opportunità di avere qui l'autore di 2 libri che hanno veramente stravolto negli ultimi anni un genere come quello del giallo, del thriller, del crime, e quindi se volete ci siamo. Io per l'occasione metterò anche gli occhiali, così vedo anche le persone. Pensa. Ah, guarda quanti siete, eccolo. Vediamo se arriva il microfono.
It's 3 questions.
Puoi fare anche in italiano se preferisci, tanto c'è la traduzione, come vuoi.
Maybe the first is just, as we said, I'm talking about the first novel. It's a bit, it's Agatha Christie's, but it's also Black Mirror. And so my question is, how you came up of, like in Nest, these 2 things, put them together. How you came up with this visionary thing?
So I've never seen Black Mirror.
Cosa?
Yeah. So everybody I know.
Perché?
So the moment, yeah.
È strano.
It is weird, I know. Everybody kept telling me, it was like, oh, this is like Black Mirror, and I'm like, sure. Great. I just never watched it, and you know what it's like now? If you miss a TV series, you've just missed that television series, because there's 20 more that have come along to replace it. So, and I have a 3-year-old daughter, so the amount of time I have to watch TV is now this big. So I just missed Black Mirror, it's just gone by. How I came up with the idea? I came up with the idea through repeated failure. I tried to write this 7 Deaths when I was 21, and the book was so terrible so awful. I should use it to inspire others. Anyone could be a novelist, because that first draft was so bad that I threw it in a drawer and just stormed off in a huff and lived the rest of my life. But I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about I needed an original idea. I needed something. You know, the way Agatha Christie had her Murder on the Orient Express, like her brilliant conclusions, I needed something to make it special. And I just didn't have it. And it took about 12 or 13 years of just kind of thinking about it. And I was just on a plane. That's all it was. I was on a plane at 2 o'clock in the morning, eating some terrible food and watching a terrible movie. And all of Seven Deaths just popped into my head. Just in 30 seconds, after 12 or 13 years of thinking about it, the entire plot just turned up. And I wrote 2,000 words of it, and then that was possibly the worst half an hour of my life, because I realised then I'd have to go and write it. And that was going to be a pain.
Thank you. Also, I said Black Mirror because it was written in the cover of The Seven Deaths of Evelyn, so I thought that you watched it. So not completely my fault.
No, not at all your fault.
Questo no, è colpa di Neri Pozza, la casa editrice.
Yeah, it's Neri Pozza's fault.
Non è vero.
I don't know if that adds a Neri Pozza reference or takes one away.
No, però evidentemente era stato Black Mirror un riferimento che quando uscì anche il romanzo d'esordio era inevitabile, perché era anche una serie che in quel momento stava andando moltissimo e parlando di questa prospettiva futuribile, neanche futuristica, e del dramma della società e in quel caso della eccoci qua, della tecnologia che ci si rivolta contro. Insomma, anche qui era un buon riferimento per questo, quindi non è colpa.
Second question.
Ok, poi dopo vediamo se ci sono altre che così...
Very fast. When you just firstly knew that Netflix was interested in adapting The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, how did you felt, and how it was that process, and just how you felt?
I felt like I'd be able to pay my mortgage, which is a very nice feeling. One of my biggest problems in life is that I don't really get too excited about many things, but I also don't really get down about too many things. So when the news comes, when I got an agent, you know, when you're first writing, it's a big deal to get an agent, and it's a big deal to get a publisher, and it's a big deal. Every step of it's a big deal. And everyone around me was popping champagne corks, and, you know, you get the bestsellers and you get the adaptations. Like, I'm living a very blessed life. But for me, I just have to get on with the next thing. I'm not someone who can celebrate too much or at all, really. It happens, I'm like, oh, that's good, that's nice. That's the mortgage covered for next few months, next thing. And then, so I've always got my eye on the next thing I need to be doing. So it's kind of exhausting. You're always on a treadmill. But at the same time, you know, if the next book bombs spectacularly, I won't feel too bad about it. So it's got its ups and downsides.
Altre rate del mutuo che continuano a farsi pagare eventualmente, quindi bene così.
That's all it ever is, yeah. Like, can I pay my mortgage? And can I buy my daughter's shoes? Because those things are expensive.
Sì, è come se lo sono. Vediamo se ci sono altre domande. Un'altra ancora? Velocissima, dai, poi diamo il turno anche ad altre persone, dai.
Something that we are very much today is that when somebody adapts a book in a TV show, it's what people say is what people listen is that you have to change something. It's just mandatory. I think it's not definitely true. You will change something because you have a budget, you have limits, you have marketing, but I think it's just wrong to say this as a prior thing. It's fine that happens in the process, but to say this before as it is something that must happen, I think it's okay.
Sì.
I think it's maybe a limit and maybe too easy. So I just wanted to ask you how much you were afraid of the changes in the adaptation.
No. I'm exactly the opposite to you. I want them to change everything.
Oh, okay.
Completely top to bottom. You've read the book. You've read it. It doesn't go away. No one's going to burn it down. It will still exist. So I think every reader of The Seven Deaths or Devil create a little movie in their head when they read it. They adapt it for themselves. A director and a TV studio is just a reader with more money. That's all they are. They're just going to put their version of it on screen. Seven Deaths specifically also, it does need to be changed for screen. There are some things that need to be changed. Do you know what it could do with? Some women. It'd be great to have some women in there. They're all male protagonists all the way through it. He jumps into male bodies. That was an oversight on my part, just as I was writing that book, and I'm proud of that book, fiercely proud of it. But when I got to the end of that book and it was published, I went to an event like this one, and a very little old lady in the front row put her hand up and she just said to me, "Why does he never jump into the body of a woman?" And I did not have an answer, and it was because I simply hadn't thought about it. Just hadn't come up in all the planning and the months of planning and plotting, I hadn't thought about it. And it bugs me to this day. It's a flaw in the novel. I wish I'd done that. I just didn't see it. So I've tried to rectify that with Devil and Dark Water. There's a lot more strong female characters in that. So if the adaptation for Netflix can change that, and it is going to change that, I've read the pilot script, so there is going to be female protagonists in it, I will be indebted to them for life for fixing my mistake.
Infatti non ti nascondo che era una delle domande bonus che ti avrei fatto, perché è interessante, perché si vede secondo me anche la differenza tra il primo e il secondo romanzo, proprio a livello di profondità narrativa dei personaggi femminili, e quindi chiedendoti anche, a questo punto mi aggancio alla domanda, se hai in previsione, per quello che stai scrivendo, che ci raccontavi, senza spoilerare troppo, se hai in previsione di lavorare anche su questo, quindi nel dare, visto che è un genere anche, no? Quello del giallo, del romanzo, thriller, dove le protagoniste non abbondano di solito, femminili, se hai intenzione di esprimere ancora di più un po' questo.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I can't really recall now, Devil I think is about a 50-50 split, but the main drive force in that is a female perspective. I suspect, well, I more than suspect because I've halfway written it, that the third novel will be female perspective again. The protagonists are women. It's just a more interesting viewpoint for me to write from at this point. And also, it's a really strange thing to say, but also I do have a 3-year-old daughter now in the world, and I'm just trying to understand her. So if I can just write female protagonists over and over again, maybe one day I'll understand my daughter, because she's crazy. And so that would be great.
È vero, è un po' matta, però è fantastica. Poi l'abbiamo conosciuta prima, è stupenda. Insomma, se ti porta anche questo a comprendere un po' meglio tua figlia, ben venga, insomma, che ci siano anche delle complessità nei personaggi, nello studio dei personaggi. Ci sono altre domande? Allora, eccoci qua. Grazie mille.
Oh, thank you for the question over there, my friend, as well, by the way. It's always terrifying to be the first person.
Posso chiederlo in italiano?
Sì, prego, prego.
Allora, le sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle è molto intricato come trama. Ci sono appunto azioni dei personaggi che si ripercuotono su quelle successive, quelle precedenti. La mia domanda è: come ha fatto a non perdersi scrivendolo? Cioè, ha usato strategie particolari per mantenere il filo? È stato difficile, immagino?
I think when I was writing Seven Deaths, I spent 3 months plotting that novel, so I didn't write a word of it until it was fully plotted out, until I knew every action of every character, and I had a spreadsheet of every 2 minutes of every character's day in the house. So I knew exactly from minute to minute what was happening, and then it was just a case of picking out the most interesting perspectives and the most interesting actions to focus on. So very weirdly, I didn't get lost in that novel too much. I found it quite easy. Whereas Devil, the second novel, I got very lost in. My initial draft of Devil was about 170,000 words, and I tossed away, I think, 150,000 of them, as in I threw them into the bin and never used them. They were gone. I didn't pull anything out of them because I wrote the wrong book first, and then I had to write the right book the second time. And the reason why is it depends on the palette. So I always describe this almost like painting, and it's how big your canvas is and how many colours you give yourself. Agatha Christie and science fiction go together very well. Agatha Christie and a Groundhog Day loop go together very well. Agatha Christie and body swapping go together very well. Those bits of the novel wanted to gel together. They want to be the same thing. finding a plot within that was actually no difficulty, because you know what the complexities are. Well, someone's body swapping, why is that happening? The day is looping, why is the day looping? The questions were obvious that needed to be answered. When I started writing Devil, that was a novel that took place in 1634, and the only fixed thing was that there was a boat that was leaving from Batavia and going all the way to Holland. It was a 9-month voyage, and within that you could have done absolutely everything, so I tried to do absolutely everything. And 170,000 words later, I had a mess. Just a pulp of characters and incident that didn't connect. I then had to pull that apart to find the story, the interesting story within all the stories that I'd written. It was much more difficult. And the other thing I discovered within that was that horror and Sherlock Holmesian detective stories don't want to go together, because a horror book fundamentally works by killing characters off to raise the tension and to make the threat of the monster more real. If you kill all the characters off in a detective novel, the only person you're left with is the murderer, which ekes away any tension that may be in it. So those books didn't want to go together, and I had to find a way of putting them together. And this is what we were talking about earlier with problem solving. You're always constantly solving a problem. What I realised is I was writing the wrong horror. You can't write Stephen King horror, you've got to write Gothic horror. So that's what I did. I turned it into a Gothic. I turned the boat into a cathedral. I turned it into a massive, sinister old church at sea. And I used Gothic horror tropes instead, which again, sorry, it's a very long-winded way of answering your question. But I didn't get lost because I used an Excel spreadsheet as the short version.
C'è tempo ancora per un paio di domande, avevo visto un paio di mani alzate, eccola là. Grazie.
Hi. I know you mentioned a lot of authors that helped you in writing your books, but I just wanted to know if you have a comfort book or a book that has a special place in your heart, or if you have one like that.
Yeah, so I read The God of Small Things by Arunati Roy. I don't know if anyone knows that book, but if you don't know that book, you should leave here immediately and go and buy that book. Don't buy it from Amazon. It's just a wonderful book, and there's something on every page of every paragraph of every line of that book. There is very few books on this planet could only have been written by one person, and that book could only have been written by Arunati Roy. It's just beautiful. It's just wonderful. So I read that book every year without fail. I always find something different in it, and I always find a new perspective as I get older, especially because there's young children in it and there's older characters, and I found that as I'm getting older I'm identifying more with the older characters rather than the younger characters. But it's great. And then alongside that I read Terry Pratchett. So Terry Pratchett books are just silly, cross-genre. They're brilliant, they're very funny, they're sinister when they need to be, the witty, the characters are great. So what I tend to do is, when I'm really stuck in one of my books, or I'm not enjoying the writing, the last thing I want to do is go and read a big, heavy book that has too much to say. So I go and read a Terry Pratchett, and it just loosens my mind up. It just it frees my mind of whatever problem it is. And I read that book, and I read it in about 2 or 3 days, and then I find I can get back to work quite easily. And the difficulty then is just to not mimic his tone and his irreverence and put it into my own novel, because that happens sometimes as well. If I'm reading a book with a strong tone, I'll suddenly find 3 pages of it have been written mimicking that author's tone, which is very strange. So if you read anything of my 3rd book and it suddenly sounds like Terry Pratchett, you now know why.
Abbiamo tempo per un'ultimissima domanda, se c'è qualche altra curiosità, qualche ultima cosa, altrimenti se ci siamo io concluderei la nostra chiacchierata. Io ringrazio ancora di cuore innanzitutto Neri Pozza per aver pubblicato evidentemente in Italia Le sette morti di Evelyn Hardcastle e Il diavolo e l'acqua scura, e tra pochissimo troverete Stuart Turton per il firmacopie, se vorrete far firmare le vostre copie proprio qui fuori dalla sala, e poi naturalmente Neri Pozza vi aspetta nel padiglione Oval per tutti gli altri titoli editi, insomma, lì a disposizione. Io sono Florencia di Stefano-Abichain, vi ringrazio di cuore, grazie davvero Neri Pozza per aver avuto la fiducia di farmi dialogare con Stuart Turton, e Stuart, grazie mille davvero per esserti aperto con noi. Grazie e ci rivediamo presto.
Thank you. Thanks guys, thanks for coming.
Grazie a tutti, il Salone del Libro continua.